It's just an example, you get the idea. So, we've covered the basics of the left side of your units and monsters and buildings. Now, we'll cover the right side. So on the right side of your monster, or your unit, or your building, you'll notice that there are abilities. Now, abilities come in a lot of different forms. And there's actions, which are denoted by a circle around the ability. There are skills, which are denoted by a square around the ability. There are advantages, which are denoted by a star. There are triggers, which are denoted by the specific type of attack that they apply themselves to. So if it's a brawl trigger, you'll see a brawl symbol and then the symbol for the ability. If it's a blast trigger, you see the blast symbol, and then inside of it will be an ability icon. And then if it's a power ability, you'll see the power symbol and the ability icon inside of it. So if you see a brawl, a blast, or a power symbol on the right side of your monster or your unit or building, then you will know that that's a trigger, and that only activates if you make that type of attack. And there's also reactions, and reactions are basically things that you get or you gain if your unit, monster, if your figure is damaged in any way, if your figure is hit. So one thing to clarify also is that structures, monsters, and units all are considered figures. So anytime something talks about a figure, it's talking about any of these things. What I want to show is a couple of different abilities. You see Zorog here, he has a brawl symbol with a down arrow. Now if I go to my reference sheet, I can look up what exactly that down arrow means. I'll look under the triggers for my faction, and I see that the down arrow means energy drain, and I can read it. It says, target monster's controller moves 1 A die from his monster pool to his unit pool. So, for a trigger, if the attack hits, then you get to apply that trigger. So if I were attacking Alter Sky Sentinel, notice that I am adjacent to him right now. I make a brawl attack, I roll my dice, they hit, and then everything is resolved and that attack goes through, then that trigger is going to happen, and Dylan would then move 1 A die from his monster pool to his unit pool. Just read the trigger and do what it says. Then skills are always applied. Skills are always happening. They don't require any kind of, there's no this happens and then the skill happens. They're always in effect. And so I've got a skill here that has a little arrow moving upwards in a square, and that's the climb ability. And it says that figures with this symbol can move through buildings. So if I have climb, I can move through buildings at all times. Alright, so you notice that each ability icon can have a red symbol and a blue version of the symbol. And this applies to agendas and factions and things like that. So just look at the bottom of your unit, your monster here, and you'll see 3 symbols. One is the faction of that monster, one is the agenda of that monster, and one is the energy type of that monster. Now, this really doesn't come into play a lot, but get to know these faction symbols, get to know the agenda symbols, because a lot of times it is applicable to various abilities. It's just something to keep in mind. It's very obvious once you get it. If you get your monster and you get your units, you notice they're all the same faction, and they're all going to be the same agenda, and then they're all going to have the same energy type. So it's not hard unless you start mixing armies, which really shouldn't happen for a while. So now that we know about agendas, if you have a red ability icon here on your right, then all adjacent agenda figures are going to get that ability. If it's a blue ability icon, then all agenda figures, everything in your army that is the same agenda as your monster, is going to gain that ability. And so you'll notice here that Zorog has climb in an ability icon in a square, so it's a skill, it's always applied, and it's blue, so that means that every agenda figure that I have gets climb. What climb says is that this unit can move through buildings on its advancement. So let's say we have this chomper. Now this chomper normally couldn't advance through this building, but because he's an agenda figure, the same faction, the same agenda as Zorog, who has climb in blue, he also gets climb. And so he can go right through this building, because now it's as if he has the climb ability. And there's various abilities like this. For instance, if Zorog had a red ability, and this unit was adjacent, then it would also get that ability. Pretty easy. Okay, so we've covered abilities. We've covered factions and agendas and energy types. We've covered all of the basic stats on the left of your figures. And we know that at first, hearing all of this, you're probably thinking, oh, this is so much rules and everything. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what these symbols mean. I'm looking up everything. That's completely fine. It should be a bit confusing at first, doing it like this. But as you watch the game progress that Dylan and I are playing, it all really does become quite intuitive and very easy to understand. But we wanted to get this out of the way before we went on with our game. So that's just something that you should know, and we'll organize the board again and get back to where we were, and we'll continue with a couple of activations, and you'll start to see how the game works and how it's played. And then if you need to, you can rewind to this section and go over this stuff again. It'll make a lot more sense once you see the game played. Alright, so I'm going to clear the board here and get everything out of the way. We'll get back to a normal game, and this will all start making sense. It'll all come along, don't worry. I'll give you your Hyperform back here. That guy was there, this building here. Done with. A monster back here. G-Tank is back in your reserves. And things are back to normal. So the turn has been passed to me, and I can either take a unit activation or a monster activation. Since I have no action dice in my unit pool, I can't take a unit activation, so I'll take a monster activation. That now makes the monster pool my active pool. Anytime I spend action dice in my monster activation, those dice are going to go back to my unit pool. So you see kind of the rhythm. Like you'll activate your monster, put some dice, use the dice to put them in your unit pool, and now you have the ability to use units, and then you might put those back in your monster pool. And so there's a constant balance and rhythm going on between units and monsters and which ones you're going to be using. So I'll take my monster activation. And the first phase I have in a monster activation is called the Power Up phase, or the Power phase. And this is one way of generating power die for me. Now I'll talk a little bit about power die since I've got my monster and he's ready to roll. Power die are these red die, and we talked about them earlier. These have the best hit percentage of any die, and you can add them to monster rolls, and you can also use them, in fact you need at least one of them, to make power attacks. Now power attacks are what make the monster versus monster combat really incredible, and it involves you throwing other monsters, doing special things, swatting things, all of that, things that aren't just the normal brawl blast. And you can only do those with power die. So for monsters, power die are extremely important. And to show this, you have a power phase at the beginning of each of your turns. Now, what a power phase is you have the option of rolling up to 3 dice, 1, 2, or 3. And if any of those hit, if you see any strikes on the action die, then you successfully power up. And when you successfully power up, you make a count of the various things that are going to give you power die. Like I said in the beginning, if you have a unit controlling this objective zone, then that's going to be worth +1 power die. If you have a building secured, that's worth 1 power die. And there's a lot of buildings that have abilities that if you're securing this building, you get an extra power die, or you can use an ability to get extra power die. But for now, let's say I want to power up. So I'm going to roll these 3 action die, and I got a strike, which means I successfully powered up. These 3 action die then will go to my unit pool, because I use them. And now I count how many power die I'm going to get from that power up phase. I see 1 here from the chomper securing that, and I don't see any more. I'm not securing this building. I don't have 3 adjacent units. I'm not in any other power up zones. I don't see anything that is going to give me any more power die. So I'll take 1 power die, and I'll move it into my power die pool over here by my monster. I can now use this if I so choose. Then from the power phase, we go to the hyper phase. Now, the hyper phase is a phase exclusive to monsters, and what it is an ability to actually hyper up into your hyper form from your alpha form. Normally, in order to enter your hyper form, this alpha form needs to be destroyed. But you can circumvent that and instead switch out your hyper form for your alpha form, but it comes at a cost. And you'll notice in the bottom of your hyper form, there's a little radioactive looking symbol with a number on it. And that's the number of power die that you have to spend in order to hyper up into your form. Now, Ultra Zorog's hyper cost is 5, and I have 1 power die here, so I can't do that. I can't hyper up, so I'll stay on my alpha form, and I'll just skip my hyper phase. Now onto the advancement phase, or movement phase. Keep in mind that monsters treat all terrain as passable, except buildings. Monsters can't move through buildings unless they have an ability that lets them do so, and they also can't move through enemy units. Now, monsters can move through impassable territory, they can move through rough terrain without any penalty, and they can move through allied units, but they can't end their advancement on any other figure. So, even though I can move through this Scorcher here, I could not end my movement like this, obviously. The miniatures don't even allow it. But if I were here, I could move 1, 2, 3, 4, and end my movement there. So I can move through them. Also, whenever I'm counting for a monster, I can do the same old 1 diagonal and all the rest straight. So, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would be my 5 movement. And I have a max of 6, so I could also go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you notice that it's fine for me to be on impassable terrain because I am a giant monster. Nothing is impassable to me. So here's legal moves, and I'm going to pay 1 to advance him up to this building. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is his max movement. You'll notice under him is all sorts of terrain that units normally would be affected by, but he's a big lumbering monster, and he doesn't care about trees and rocks and things like that. So Zorog sees this downtown high-rise, and he's angry, so he's going to smash it. And all I need to do is make a brawl attack against this building. I'm in melee range, I'm base to base with it. I can make a brawl attack from any point when I'm adjacent. So even if I were out here, I can make that brawl attack. As it is, I'm aligned. And in order to make an attack, I will look at my brawl rating. That's a 7 with a boost die of 2. That's a little star in the 2. So I get 2 boost die. And I have a max of 7. Now I only have 6 action die in my pool, remaining in my pool, so I can't use my maximum 7, I'll just stick to 6. And I have 6 action die and 2 boost die. Now, if I choose, on any monster attack, I can add power dice if I desire. I have 1 that I could add to increase my percentage of hitting this building, but for now, I don't think I want to. I'll leave it over here in my power dice pool. So, if I make this successful brawl, I will actually get whatever the printed energy is on this building. You'll notice it has a defense of 5 and also a energy of 3. That means in a successful brawl by a monster, I would gain 3 power die, put them in my pool. Now, if a monster blasts this building, anytime a monster blasts a building, it's only going to yield 1 power die unless something else tells you otherwise. In order to get what's printed on the actual building, you need to brawl it. You have to brawl to get the printed energy cost. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a brawl attack.